All right, well, we have a full agenda today, including a long-awaited presentation from Marilee. I'm going to kick off by introducing Aaliyah or letting her introduce herself. And then just so you're thinking about this, right after that, I'm going to do, let's check if we got to know each other. Everybody will introduce a person whom they choose next, the popcorn variety, and say one thing about them that they've learned. You could, you should also say something about what that person is doing in the project. Keep it short, though. We are not going to have a meeting full of describing what each other does. Also, so I'm just putting this in your head, then I'm going to let Aaliyah talk. Also, when the turn is passed to you, you can add or correct something that's been said about you if you would like to share something about yourself. Okay, so we're going to start with Aaliyah, and then I'm going to hand it to our speaker, Marilee, to introduce somebody else, and then we'll come back to Marilee at the very end. And I'll keep track in the chat of who's been introduced because I tend to forget, don't know about the rest of you. Okay, but take it away, Aaliyah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaliyah, she, her. I am the new program manager, and I'm very excited to be here. I have been in Fort Collins for about a decade now, and this is my first time working fully at CSU. So I'm very thrilled and a bit of a sponge at the moment, just learning everything. I started this week. I come from a background in the nonprofit sector and education space, specifically more in the arts, working on affordable housing and equitable pay practices for musicians and artists. I'm a musician myself as well, do lots of program management in that space and international peace building as well. So this is a little bit different, but I'm very excited to bring those perspectives and skills to this work. Great to meet you all.
I think you said I was next, right, Tammy?
Yep, you introduce somebody
picked
else.
someone. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Christian to you, Christian Laurent. And one of the things that I learned about Christian during the get to know parts of the project was that which I was very impressed about, I think New Year's, his parents would have he and his siblings select goals and choose goals for the year. And they couldn't be just like, I want to be sure I get out of bed on time. It didn't seem like they had to be pretty substantial. And I thought, man, I was really impressed, but I was kind of glad I didn't have Christian's parents because that would have been hard. So, but I was in awe of that, but also like, oh man, and did think about how I might have been able to do that with my kids, which might have been good. Christian on the project, I'm going to mess this up a lot, so be prepared, Christian. He is part of what I think of as the interface of the one thing, like the people, the owners of the house and the system. That part of what he's working on is that interface between, what the system is doing and what they can see that it's doing on a screen. The extent to which they actually can change the system around, things like that. So I see him as a middle person, but I know there's a whole lot of work on both sides of that.
That's great. Yeah, you nailed it. I never realized those goal setting things wasn't things that everybody did, right? You're in your little bubble and you don't realize till later it's not what everybody did. Thank you for that. That was I think you captured that well. I am going to introduce Erica. Let's see. Erica is an assistant professor in systems engineering. I want to say I remember that you're from the Northwest, or like, is that correct? Can't remember if it's Washington or Oregon, but it was one of those two, if I'm remembering correctly. And Erica, I would say, is a lot of her work is focused on the people-centric side of things. How do our participants interact with our technology? And one of the things that I think I'm going to be most interested from the work that I think Erica is doing is, do people want to be interacting with our technology, let alone how they do it. Do they actually want to? And is recently married.
Yeah, thanks. That was all accurate. Raised in Washington, went to undergrad in Oregon, so you were close with both of those. Let's see. I'll introduce Dominic. Dominic is working with Tammy on developing the pressure models from the in-house data. He's done some good presentations about that. And something that I've learned about him is I'm pretty sure he's graduating really soon. And that's exciting.
We all feel that way.
Yeah, crossing my fingers on that one. Thank you. Yep, like she said, I'm Dom. I will be introducing Will. Will, one thing I've learned is he is a huge Office fan. Very big Office fan. So that was a really cool thing to learn. Will has worked a lot with our site management, both with Epic Homes, kind of managing the relationships with the people who've been in that. He's been involved with CDPHE, which I'm not super privy to, but and he was there for all of the Epic Homes, Epic Sapphire homes that we did as well. And so he was really instrumental in setting up and understanding the equipment that we were using for that. So yeah.
Thanks, Dom. I think saying I'm a huge Office fan is still an understatement. And yeah, the CDPHE project is very top secret, so that's why I don't share a lot of those details. But yeah, thanks for that, Dom. I'm gonna introduce Misa to keep our little field team going, since Misa's worked with Dom and I in the field for the Sapphires project. Since I guess kind of started right as we were wrapping up doing a lot of the field work and stuff like that. So I think most of the conversations I had with Misa was about being going to school in Arizona and being from Idaho, and then talking about field work and things like that. And I never thought, it's like, hey, so what else do you do on this project? Except I see you have meetings a lot with Tammy in her office. I'm like, oh yeah, very busy guy. So yeah.
All very true. Yeah, I started in late August, so I've been here for a little over 6 months now. But yeah, let's see. I will introduce, I guess we'll go with Jordan. So Jordan is a graduate student that is working for Christian. And he kind of he was helping a little bit with the house that you see in the background, getting that set up, and it's functional now. So that was pretty cool. And then now I think he's working more on helping the interface between the system and what's happening with the connection between the vent and the house. I think that's correct. But yeah, he's been around for a little bit. He just graduated, I think, last semester and just started his position as a grad assistant this semester, I think. But yeah.
Hey everyone, thank you, Misa. That is was all correct. I'm going to introduce Tammy. She is the kind of the main organizer for many different groups in this project. She's a great data scientist and talented coder. I've seen kind of the advice she's given Dominic, and she comes up with some great stuff and is able to analyze things on a level that's very impressive. And yeah, that's my interaction with her.
Okay, well, thank you, Jordan. I am going to introduce Ellison. Ellison is an associate professor in civil engineering, primarily focusing on air quality. She's been the interface to the Epic Homes project because she engages with a lot of city and I'm not sure where they're all housed, but city, county, community projects. And so she's been our tap there. One of the things I have learned about Ellison is that she likes fabric in many different ways. Yeah, that's all.
That's funny. Yes, if you have any cast off clothing that you can't donate anywhere else, I would take it. See, I will introduce Paul. I don't think that you've been introduced. Paul Francisco is a senior level researcher here at the Powerhouse and Energy Institute. I have had the pleasure of knowing Paul for over a decade now and learning from him and his work over that entire period. So glad to have him here in Colorado. And on this project, he's been instrumental in developing the technology for implementation in homes, and is, in my experience, one of the most extensively experienced people working with real people in real homes and real places, both as residents and managers of buildings and facilities and homes. So I always value learning from you on this project as well as many others. Something I've learned about you, you like really intense music. At least by my, I mean, this is a general term, but yeah, I think your musical taste expand my own.
Right, yeah, I think it's intense by a lot of people's standards. So I will introduce Whitney. I think Marilee's supposed to be last, so Whitney's the only other one, so I'll introduce Whitney. You know Whitney more than I think most of the people here. Whitney has been here since November 1st as a project manager working with me. She has, in my mind, transformed in a beneficial way the way I work, and I think we're really moving things forward in exciting ways. Whitney has worked in mostly the private sector in the past, and for example, in textiles and I've been learning from her some as well. Like I learned about how, not just, I learned part of why carpets are such a bad idea because of her background. I've known carpets were such a bad idea, but now I know some of the science behind why carpets are just as horrible things as they actually are. So she brings a lot of curiosity and broad knowledge and project management experience with her. And her role on this project is, I think, largely to just help make sure everything is going okay.
Yep, I would say that's all accurate. So now I introduce Marilee, right?
Yeah,
So,
and you're new
so,
and you don't know Marilee well, so good luck here.
so here's what I know about Marilee. Marilee is an integral part of the communications team for this specific project and helps to inform the interface between the technical side of the project and the actual people that are helping to open their homes in order to gather data. And so her skills in being able to communicate and talk to people and understand human behavior has been really helpful in kind of bridging that gap. I also learned that Marilee has 2 kids, right? And has shared my pain in the high school transition process.
Awesome. Wow, thank you guys for playing. That was great. So Aaliyah, that's just a taste of who we are. You can see why doing this every week can get a little bit long, but sometimes it's good to do it. Before Marilee starts with her presentation, I wanted to say something quickly about scheduling. Just a minute. I think we have a couple of plans. Next week, we are planning the Healthy Housing Coalition. And then the week after, a lot of people, Paul, Misa, Will, are going to be at the HPC conference. Anyone else? And remind
Be
me,
there
was
also,
who?
Whitney.
Oh, Whitney. And so, for the next 2 weeks, I have to leave in the middle of the meeting because I'm on a search committee and that's when they scheduled the presentation. And so I don't know if it's a great idea to do our planning next week, but maybe we can start it and just do it for a bit. I'm thinking we should probably just cancel the 12th since so many people will be gone and I'll be not really available either. And then we have presentations planned out for the 19th and the 26th. So, and nothing after that. So be sure to get your things on the agenda if you want to present or you want to discuss something or you offer to discuss something. Paul, you got a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out, I think that there had been an idea that if we had a meeting on the 12th, it would be an opportunity for those who will have been at the conference, the HPC conference for the first time, to share back to the group some of their takeaways. Because it is the industry that we are trying to work with. And other than me, I don't think anybody really knows it that deeply. And it would be interesting to get other people's thoughts. So before we just cancel the 12th, I want to put that out there as a potential good use for it, whether you can attend the whole thing or not.
Right, I wasn't canceling. I was canceling because I thought you all would be gone. Are you saying you're going to be back on Friday? I noted that I misunderstood what was written in the notes.
So I'm back on the 11th. Misa's back on the 11th. Will? You're back later?
Yeah. I'm driving, so I'm gonna be leaving after the conference.
And so would it be only, and Whitney, I think you're going to see a friend, right? So is Misa the only one besides me that would be back in time? Okay, then maybe we should just cancel it because people might find Misa's thoughts interesting, but probably be better to get everybody's at once.
I would like to hear from you all. And so I apologize for trying to cancel it. I didn't realize the intent of the note that maybe you wanted to talk about the conference. If you want to propose a rearrangement to the schedule, to see what happens, like if you want to move your filtration efficiency or something, that's totally fine with me. So go ahead and mess with the notes. I want to get on to Marilee's talk. But I'm totally comfortable with you making a proposal when more people can be around. Yeah, great idea, Paul. Okay, Marilee, we've held off long enough. It's time. Let me see. You should be enabled to share the screen.
Okay, and this is where I'm usually the one sharing the screen, so I'm probably going to call on you guys to help me know how to do this.
So
oh wait, there we go. So if I just click on that and say share.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys can see that? And if I, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm gonna see. Oh wait, get rid of that. If I do that, you can still see it? Okay.
Looks good.
Okay, so, well, first of all, I have to tell you guys that this is one of the hardest talks I've figured out how to do because the work I've been doing lately really has been more in citizen science areas that aren't quite as related to this and in some ways, and in some other areas of misinformation and stuff that aren't quite as related. So I went back and looked at, decided that I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a primer in some of the ways we think about how people process information and which I think can help with thinking about what what they might do, and for this project or for any project. So the talk's gonna talk about a little bit, some of this you may already know, and other stuff I'm hoping is new or having you think about it in different ways. And please feel free to ask questions as we go. And if I'm not paying attention to you have your hand up, just yell, because that works as well. So, and this is, the other thing to tell you is that a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today, just like in your areas, you could do kind of like a whole class, a whole semester class on some of these topics. And so it's just kind of hitting some high points as we go. So I wanted to kind of send through this in the idea of that often what I'm trying to do is figure out how people are making sense of what's going on, of the information that they're getting, and how they perceive a situation, how they react to it, how they try to navigate that situation. And typically we're looking at, health risks. So the big thing though I wanted to use, and this is from the sense-making approach, which is by a researcher named Brenda Durbin, looking at how do people move through space and time from the standpoint of they have to make a decision, and how do they move from a place where they know stuff and make a leap to a place where they don't know stuff. And when they leap, where do things happen badly? And I had a graduate student some years ago who did a study on at that time, the horrible nature of birth control pill instructions. And she was looking at how you read those instructions, and then how do you figure out whether, if you missed a pill, what do you do if you do? And so she did a lot of trying to figure out how did people bridge the gap in the knowledge that they had, because they had to make a decision. And so thinking about it, the sense that people are making of, decisions they're making of the information that's coming at them really helps us when we're thinking of who those people are we're trying to influence, what they might understand, how they might be coming to that information, and so on. So I think of that when I think of, the folks in our project. So, and this is a really funky little diagram. I actually didn't make it. This is the one that you get online from the Durbin work. But the idea here is that on one side, you have someone who's leaping over like a big abyss, and they are going to leap, and they're leaping because there's not enough information, or there's something that they don't quite know. And you're hoping that you have given them enough good information and guidance that they leap and they land well. And so when you look at this little graphic, you'll notice that it talks about the situation, what's going on for them. It looks at what are the outcomes, what are the things that they're worried about, the things that they don't know, what questions do they have, what are they confused about, how do they feel emotionally, that kind of thing. And so, and you'll also look up in that where under bridge, it talks a lot about many of the things that in my field we look at when we're thinking about how people make decisions about behavior change. So just kind of wanted to throw this out as just this general idea of what I do when I think about projects. And then I wanted to come in and talk a little bit about going back to the idea of how people process and store the information that they have. So that I'm going back to how your brain is organized, or one of the theories on that, which can help us to understand how people will process the information about this project and about any messaging about it, any decisions that they make afterwards, and so on. And so one of the theories in that area, and there are a bunch of them, so this is just one, is looking at how do you organize the information and the experiences that you have so that you can readily access them when you need them. And so schema theory is one of the theories that we use. And one of the neat things about this one is that it aligns with our idea that we as humans are really cognitive misers, that we really want to get information quickly. We want to have it readily available. We want it to fit with our beliefs, our values, our attitudes, and we want to then move on to the next thing. And so if you think of a schema as this structure, and I'm going to show you an example of one in a second, an example of what they might look like. So, because of course, We don't really know, but that'll help you to see how it's a structure, and they're very there are lots of nodes and lots of connections in a schema. So in honor of it's almost Easter and it's spring, I'm throwing up an example that you can see often online of a schema for an egg. And what you'll see here, a couple of things to notice are there are a lot of connections. So if you were to see a hen cackling, that might make you think about eggs, and that might make you think about baby chicks. And so everything is connected within a schema. And the more connections that you have, the more likely that schema and that information it will be activated when you need it. But you'll notice in this picture too that you've got a lot of different kinds of information about eggs. You've got information about buying them. You've got information about eating them. You've got information about the animals who create eggs. It has a lot of stuff in it. And schema typically do have quite a bit of information in them. They can be quite rich. And over time, like when you think when you're 2 versus now when you're a whole bunch older than that, schema when you're 2 are pretty low key. They're pretty straightforward. They're pretty underdeveloped. But over time, they will get bigger. So if you think about that, your brain is full of these kinds of structures, and they will be connected to other structures. So that other things that we know about schema, or we assume based on what we understand about information processing and how the brain works, is that you build them over time, you reinforce them by calling them up. So if it's something you do a lot, that schema is going to be readily available to help you make decisions. It's going to be something you've exercised a lot. We also know that if you come across information that's not consistent with your schema, then you may not even store it. You'll forget it, or you might reject it out of hand. There are times when, particularly if you're early in learning stuff, you'll bring that information and it'll become part of the schema. As you get more information on a topic, you can still augment the schema that you have, but it's going to be more challenging for you to do that because it's going to kind of fight against the way you think. But that's where maybe you've confronted situations where you're learning something from, there's new information about, new scientific discovery that kind of is counter to what you believed about let's say like a nutritional, or like oat bran, and you're like, well, wait a minute, I thought oat bran was supposed to be good. And now they're saying maybe it's not. And so you're going to think about that some more, and you're going to spend time, you're going to spend cognitive time doing it, and then you can transform that schema. So I don't want you to think schema are so rigid that you can never change them, but they are, they're fairly stable, which explains why people interpret the information differently. Now, when we think about schema, the reason I want to bring that up is because when we think about memory, you kind of talk about your short-term memory and your long-term memory. And I'm interested in long-term memory because that's where your schemas are stored. And I'm interested in the information that gets stored there and then how that information will be brought in when you are faced with making a decision about your health. So short-term, it'll be there a little bit, but it's not going to stay. It's not worth it as far as you're concerned. Long-term, that's the stuff that is going to be available to you for many years to help you, understand the world. Now, so you got to get a schema activated. Now, the way it can be activated is just like this little icon I've got on the screen. That's for recycling. You see that recycling icon or that logo, and you go, oh, that will remind you of certain things. If you hadn't seen that, you wouldn't be thinking about recycling. If you see it, you think about it, and all the schema associated with recycling, which could bring up all schema you have about climate change. It can bring up schema that you have about, maybe you have fond memories of recycling. Maybe when you were a kid, your parents made a big deal about going to the recycling center, and afterwards you got to have ice cream. And so you see that, it reminds you of that fun time with your parents, and ice cream. All of those are part of that schema. And what happens is when a schema is basically like tapped, it will then tap other schemas. So that idea down there on the screen talks about spreading activation. That's the idea that when one schema is tapped, you'll notice in my example, I said, oh, you might think about a fond memory with your parents, and that gets you going thinking about your parents. And now you've activated more of that part of your brain. Chronic accessibility, on the other hand, is something like when, well, you may see this a lot, or you could think about this with climate change. Some people, for them right now, and there's been a lot of talk about, young people being really worried about climate change, which is understandable, no question. But that every time that something about climate comes up, they move toward worry about climate change. And so the chronic accessibility of that part of the schema that they have about the environment can get in the way of them being open to hope about what we could do to prevent climate change. So chronic accessibility can be a good thing, but often we look at that as, oh gosh, every time you think of X, you're going to think of Y. That's like when you were a kid and every time you someone said, oh, we're going to the doctor, and you're like, oh, going to the doctor, that means I'm getting a shot. And maybe you're not getting a shot, but that's what you think about because you hate shots. That's where chronic accessibility doesn't help you. So when those schemas are activated, they can help you interpret what's going on. You're drawing on your memory, you're drawing on the knowledge, the experiences, and the emotions that you have that are associated, because schema can have associations that are affective in nature too. They are pretty stable over time. They can change, but they're relatively stable things. That's one of the challenges because they are relatively stable. Okay, so now I want to move into talking a little bit more about, okay, so you've got your schema, they've been pulled up. Now you're going to be looking at some information, let's say, or seeking information. What are some reasons you might do that? And one of the theories in this area is by a researcher named Kunda, and it's been around for quite a while now, but it's the idea of motivated reasoning. And we look at, she talks about two different ways you could be motivated. You could be motivated to find out what the answer is, what the truth is, that's really your goal. You're not your ego is not involved in it. It's not part of, how you think of yourself. You're just like, I really want to know what the answer is. Whatever the answer is, that's what I want to know. More likely, to some extent, we all typically we have biases in how we process because we want to come to a particular conclusion because that reinforces how we think. That reinforces what we think of ourselves. That reinforces the roles that we have in society. So, and that's what we talk about is there's more of a bias to the processing because you want it to align with the way you think already. And a really good example of something like this is if you think about a scientific revolution and someone comes up and says, hey, just for fun, let's say DNA really isn't that big a deal. And you're like, what? Of course it is, because maybe you're a researcher in genetics and that's really key to how you think. It would be more difficult for you to accept that DNA isn't that big a deal versus someone who's not as invested in that field. It might be like, oh, really? Well, tell me more about that. So when you are motivated to arrive at a particular conclusion, when you go into your schema, the schema you pull down are going to help to reinforce that conclusion that you would like to arrive at. That you're more biased in how you're pulling things up, in other words. And some of the biases, there are lots of biases about how we process information. And these are really interesting to look at. There can be the one that you just want things, you want to be consistent in what you think and how you feel, and you will avoid information that makes it seem like you are inconsistent. So if you have strong belief about, for example, that vaccinations are bad. We'll go there. But you hear information, it's like, no, vaccinations are really good, here's how they are, and so on. You're going to avoid that information, or you're going to counter argue it quite a bit. But confirmation bias is that you're not going to even most likely go and read that information because you don't believe it. It's not going to confirm what you hold. And maybe part of the reason you hold that belief about vaccines being bad is because of how you see yourself as a healthy person. And you think that being a healthy person, part of that is that you're not going to put what you consider to be harmful chemicals, things like that, into your body. And so you have decided vaccinations are like that. And so you're not going to go and read that information. We also know there's one of the interesting biases is that you can make a decision based on a first impression. And that's an anchoring bias. First time you see something, it's like, okay, that's how it always is. And that is nice from the standpoint of being a cognitive miser, but as we know, first impressions aren't always accurate. There's also in the field of looking at health communication and risks, optimistic bias, and that's where you tend to think bad things won't happen to you. That's why firefighters run into burning buildings. They're going to come back out, they believe, and they're more likely to come back out than you and I are, most likely. But it's the tendency to believe that you are less susceptible to a risk. It is good to have, in some ways, optimistic bias. However, when that optimistic bias then encourages you not to adopt healthy behaviors or preventive behaviors, then that's bad. So thinking about bike riding and thinking about, especially adults when they ride bikes, lots of adults don't wear bike helmets. Reason? Well, I think I'm less susceptible to that risk because I've been riding my bike for 20 years. I'm good at bike riding. I can control my bike. I know how to ride it, so they're going to be less likely to wear that bike helmet. They don't think it's going to happen. And they might have a lower chance of it happening because they're an experienced bike rider. However, in that instance, when it does happen, it's going to be a bad outcome. Plus, they are not they can't control everybody else who's riding a bike, and those squirrels that run across in front of you, and all of those things, that happen that you're like, oh, didn't realize that. So optimistic bias is something that we often have to fight, and there is a tendency to have more optimistic bias when you're younger versus when you're older. There's also the idea of a fundamental attribution error where you will look at, if you have trouble doing something, you typically will look at situational factors to explain why it didn't work well for you. It was the rain. It was riding bikes. I fell off my bike because it was rainy. It's not my fault. I'm not going to blame me. I'm going to blame something else. I can still look at myself as a really good bike rider. But if if someone else fell off their bike, I'm likely to say it's because they're not very good at it, because that helps me to preserve my status as being a good bike rider, and I'm more likely to say for them it's because they're not good at something. So, but when I do something well, whether it's by luck or by the fact I know what I'm doing, I am going to focus on a personal factor for the reason I studied hard, I really worked hard. That's why it went well. So that's another, so when you're thinking about why do people do what they do or think the way they think, this is another kind of way we process information, and often we're not aware of it. So it's kind of in retrospect, sometimes you'll look at it or you'll have someone point it out to you. So these biases that we have are difficult for us to realize because it's just the way we function. I'm going to go probably through a couple other diseases and then kind of skip ahead a little bit. But one of them that's pretty timely, think about something in the news that happened this week. Really bad accident, involved part of the infrastructure of the country, went over a body of water, the bridge that got hit by the barge. Availability heuristic is the idea that we are not really good at, or I shouldn't say we're not good. We can be fooled when we are estimating the likelihood of an event by how recently we've heard about that event. And so people, if you ask them today about, well, how likely do you think it is that that when you, let's say you live in the Kansas City area and there are lots of bridges across the Missouri River there, how likely is it that one of those bridges would fall down? You might be, well, oh gosh, yeah, it could be, because you've seen and watched maybe many times the video of that bridge on the East Coast falling down. So the more likely you are to remember something, the more likely you are to think that it happens. It messes up your estimates of the risk. We also know, and this is, the present bias is a nice one when you're thinking about how people are coming to the information that maybe you've got something that's a long-term benefit for them. And that's one of the big things with poor air quality. We know there are short-term influences on our health, but those longer-term influences are what we're particularly concerned about. And so if you put more weight on the present when you're making the decision, if you have a long-term health issue, that can really be detrimental, because you're going, hey, I'm not going to adopt those behaviors now. I'm not going to get this neat technology for my house because it's not that, I'm not that worried about it, because, and I have more costs right now. So, so that's a challenge when you're looking at costs and you're getting people to think long-term. Okay. Okay, you might want to close your eyes for about a minute or a few seconds. I'm going to skip through some slides to get to another place that I think we'll have more time on.
Sorry, I clearly needed to give you more time, maybe 2 hours.
Well, and this is one of those things, I mean, what I can do, I can keep going the way I am, Tammy. Sorry, I got to made y'all look, sorry to throw all those slides at you. Or I can just kind of jump to some stuff at the end that's looking more at risk perceptions. Do you have any preferences there, or?
This is a group decision. I think just pick one section that you think would be interesting for us. Again, sorry,
Sure.
it took so much time at the beginning. I feel like I've shorted us a little because I'd love to talk about the meaning of some of this stuff, right? There's like probably a number of theories that are relevant here.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do littler talks on other parts of it or whatever you'd like. And I'm sorry about not realizing earlier that this, how to organize this and kind of chunk it out. But I'll skip to, okay. I wanted to talk about one of the models that we've used in the study, as far as it's in the grant application, and it's one that is a nice one to use. It brings in some of the stuff we've talked about. The slides that are between this model of the health belief model and where I left off would kind of just help to elaborate on some of these things. But what I'd like you to look at particularly are the parts that are looking at, on the left side, perceived seriousness, perceived susceptibility, and I'm going to talk about those just for a few minutes. Those are basically the health belief model. It's one of many models that are out there that can be used to kind of figure out how likely are you to do something. And where the communication comes in is that if we understand more about the audience, then we know what to put into the messaging. And the model helps us to both understand the audience and to know pieces of information to put there. So perceived seriousness of the threat is, well, how bad will this be? If this happens to me, how awful is this? The second one, perceived susceptibility, is how likely do I think this is going to happen to me or to someone who's important to me? So those two variables, or those two concepts, come together, and we call that a person's perception of the threat. How bad is it? And it's how awful will I feel? And then how likely is it to occur? Those affect your likelihood of engaging in that health promoting behavior. So I can think that something like, I can think when I fall off my bike, it's really not that It's not that big a deal. I've fallen off my bike before. I got up, I had some scrapes, no biggie. Susceptibility, I might be able, I haven't fallen off my bike and gosh, when was it the last time? Can't remember. Then you're going to think that threat is low. Modifying variables can be things that are associated with demographics, that we know certain things about the roles that you have. We know things about your age, stuff like that. So for the time being, just kind of set those guys aside. We also look at, and so you'll see that perceived benefits and barriers. The neat thing about the health belief model is it looks at someone weighing, well, can I wear a bike helmet? And so the perceived benefits, they might be, well, there are perceived benefits. I won't, if I fall, my head is less likely to get hurt. That means I won't have a bad head injury. That means I can continue to work or go to school. Perceived barriers can be, I can't afford a bike helmet. Or a perception that, well, people will think I'm not a very good bike rider, and I don't want them to think that. You can have a barrier that is a cost barrier. You can have a barrier that is associated with how you feel about yourself. So those are just a couple of examples of it. You'll also notice that it talks about self-efficacy here. And we've chatted about that a little bit before, but that's the belief, do you think that you could wear a bike helmet? So you have to believe that if I say you should wear a bike helmet to protect your head when you're biking, then it's like, well, do I think I can wear it? So that can be you going, well, I don't think I can wear it because I have claustrophobia, and really anything that's really tight fitting makes me claustrophobic, whether it's boots I put on or it's a helmet. And helmets, when they're worn correctly, they're pretty tight. And you have that skin strap, and they're like, that gets me going toward claustrophobia. I can't do it. And so you believe that they will work, but you do not believe that you can use them. And so in that case, if we've got folks that have that issue, or they've got a cost barrier, things like that, we know that in messaging, we want to address those things and, have particular messaging about how to find where bike helmets are sold. Maybe there's some programs where you can get them for cheap or they're free. When it comes to claustrophobia and that feeling, there could be particular kinds of helmets that are less, make you feel less that way. Or maybe there's a program where you can try a bike helmet for a week, see how it feels. If you don't like it, bring it back, try another one. So kind of like, like when you're trying a car and you can try it, you can test drive it, that kind of a thing. So we can find ways to, through messaging and through programs as well, to increase someone's self-efficacy that indeed they can adopt that behavior. The last thing I'll mention here on this one is this cue to action. So a cue to action is, remember when I showed you that recycling logo? That can be a cue to action. If you have in your hand a bottle and you're done with it and you're like, cue to action can be you turn it over, you see the logo, you go recycle it because it has told you how to do it. A cue to action can be a message. A cue to action can be a billboard, message on a billboard. It can be a reminder from your doctor. There are lots of things that can cue you to. It's like a nudge. And there's a lot of research on nudging. But a cue is just something that reminds you of something that you were planning to do, or it reminds you of something that you need to decide about. I have lots of cues to action. I have lots of pieces of paper that, I write stuff down all the time. Those are my cues to action. So health belief model says you can basically, the idea here is you can have thought about the threat, you can have thought about the barriers and things like that, and you can be ready to adopt that behavior. But under the health belief model, you need something to remind you, to cue you to do it. And so that's another thing that can be in the case of the technology that we're talking about. If it was in fact something where the homeowner was turning on and off the system, it could be that there's a reading on the display that says, bad air's coming your way, which would be the cue. That cue is hit the button, turn on the machine. We think of the air quality indicator, that tells you like, what air quality is today, that is a cue to action. If you look at the air quality indicator, it can help you to decide what you're going to do. So on that note, and I apologize for I put a whole lot of stuff in here. If you have any questions, let me know. But I'm going to go ahead and let's see. How do I stop the share? There's probably
I think there's a, I don't know what you can see, but there should be a, sorry, I'm pretty clueless.
oh, hold on. Let me try something before I do that. Oops. Oh, good heavens. I'm so sorry. Oh, stop share. Duh. See, cue to action, didn't see it. Big red thing right there.
So, Marilee, I, kind of mixing up what you shared before. I assume there's such a thing as too many cues, because then you just tune them out, or it's
Yes.
accessible.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about how that gets designed?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at like, because you can get too much, and then people will tune it out. And so you're really looking at with behavior, a lot of studies you're looking at when in a person's day, for example, would they need that cue? So, like that's why in the morning, what do you look at? You typically look at what's the weather for that day, because you're thinking about what to wear or how you're going to get to work. And so so when you're thinking about the cue, you want to place it in a time and in a place that is convenient for someone, and you don't want to keep really and the cue can just sit there, honestly, so you can come to the cue. For one thing, that can be one approach. That, like the air quality indicator, if someone builds a habit of looking at it, just like you guys probably, I mean, I usually pull up the National Weather Service in the morning and look at what's the temperature going to be today, and is it going to rain? And the cues are all right there. It tells it's already set up that way. So that's where we will look at things like apps can be, that provides that information. Indicator lights can provide that information. Before we had such, we had so much information on the internet and things, people would watch the news in the morning to find out what the weather's going to be. And so the cue was, oh, the news is on. Okay, I'm gonna watch, or I'm gonna watch at a particular place in the news. So one answer I would give you is consistency in the cue and when and where it is, and then a cue that provides the information that the person wants. So a lot of this is associated with really studying that audience and figuring out how they go about their day and when that cue would be the most helpful to them. Another thing I would just kind of say was part of the reason I kind of I brought you through starting at how people create schemas and move forward was in general, just to give you a general idea of that when we provide information to people, we're fighting quite a bit of stuff, because people don't come to us as open vessels and ready typically to get the information, or even if they do, they still will have biases. And a lot of what we try to do is, figure out what those are. So the survey that, Erica and Paige and I and all of you guys we worked on is part of what we're looking at there is understanding that audience more, so that we can understand how innovations like the one we're working on in this project and others can be tailored to those to the decisions that they're going to make, and to be that the innovation can be useful, because we want the innovation to be adopted. So that audience understanding really helps a lot with that.
Do we have time for questions, Tammy?
Oh yeah,
Or
I'm
should I
sorry,
wait
sure.
till later?
Yeah, I think so. We're supposed to be done, but I feel like we could ask questions about every slide for like a long time. Maybe this is normal stuff for you, Marilee. And it
Yeah,
might be things that we all know inherently, but I think many of us are not exposed to the language around it and the framing all the time. Go ahead,
and
Elle.
go ahead. Yeah, sorry. I was going to say that totally makes sense, guys, and I apologize.
No, I shouldn't apologize. I feel really grateful for the presentation. I think what's coming to mind, I put it in the chat, Daniel Kahneman passed away. And
Yeah.
and I know that's not directly related to what you're presenting, but I think in reading one or two like written pieces about him, I think I was struck by, I wasn't alive at the time when behavioral or when economists were being most influenced, I think in the 70s and 80s by some of his initial work that showed although you're treating humans as rational subjects, there's lots of good evidence from psychology where he came from to show that that's not how they behave. And I guess why I bring that up, it strikes me that in the realm of engineering interventions that have at least embraced that technology alone is insufficient, we've moved on to, well, technology plus really good behavioral interventions. Now that's the ticket. Like we understand how to get these interventions in people's lives. And I'm just struck by how naive that view seems to be in light of what you present. But I'm wondering your perspective from your field, like, oh, I don't know the right question. Like it doesn't feel like a binary where it's like, it's all wrong to try to present information, but it feels like a futile endeavor to measure the impact of that information as like it got used. So have you seen like interesting ways to measure like a more nuanced spectrum of uptake? I don't know what the right
Yeah.
words are.
Yeah, I mean, most of our models will look at what are the things that come before the behavior change, because we know the behavior is going to take a while. And unless it is dictated, like it's a law, and so, and in the US, we use persuasion largely to get people because we want them to feel they have choice, which they do. And so we will look at attitude change, we will look at intention, we will look at even a change in their perception of the risk, because all of those will be those precursors to what ultimately will happen. And the other thing that we try to do is really, and it's basically looking at the breadcrumbs that get you there. And the problem we have is most of our studies are not done over a long enough time to really see an impact. And that's really frustrating because it costs a lot of money to follow people over long periods of time. Plus, studies get so messy if you're trying to, you can't control people for that long. So you have a lot of alternative explanations for the reason that they chose to adopt that behavior or something. So some of them, but more, I will say that more recently, we are seeing more funding for longer term studies, that we've had, and to going back into to places and seeing, how long it'll take. So I think the understanding of you've got to be in it for the long haul on some of these things for them really to be adopted. And you also have to keep incentivizing it in different ways to keep it, adopted, I would say too. So it is frustrating. But the other thing I would say too, Ellison, is that we on my end are really excited for collaborations like this and for the push for those, because then we get to come in more at a place where we could help to affect some change in the way you think about the people who will adopt the technology and the likelihood of them persisting and things like that. So it's fun to be brought to the table, because that's been a change. I mean, I've been a researcher for quite a while, and there's certainly over that arc, there has been positive movement.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I took up all the question time.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge it's 2:00. And Marilee, I think there's a role for you just bringing the slide deck to a meeting and then using it to show how to answer questions around what we're doing. And so I want to not drop this, but come back to it, and maybe even some of the material that you didn't have time to show could come back in a later meeting because I think we could ask a lot of questions about what this means.
No, I'd be happy to do that. And if I thought, I don't mean to apologize a lot, but I'm going to do it once more. If I thought more carefully about like gosh, there's a lot I could do and I could have segmented this more, but I appreciate getting to show some of the stuff that I do to you guys, or some of the ways that we think on this end.
Yeah, we're grateful for the education that we failed to incorporate into our formal education. We can, so yeah, let's not drop this. And I think that slide deck could become a resource for further conversations. Thanks everyone for attending. Have a great weekend.
Yep, great presentation. Thank you.
That was awesome,
Thanks.
Marilee. Thank you.
Sure, I appreciate it. See you guys.